type in there. Is one. So now.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Well,
How'd it
I
go?
had my
Yeah. How'd it go?
poorly.
Oh, we'll talk after class. We'll talk
I
after.
I didn't part of it went okay, but basically I'm not real good on lung function.
Oh, okay. So,
So I just got out of there about 15 minutes ago. I talked to Moise.
are you in the car?
I am in the car.
Okay.
So I was going to go to Target up here and Costco up here, but I wanted to get onto the class. So I'm going to drive home and then go to Costco by me and Target by me later after I go to the gym.
All right. All right. I'm probably going to go to Costco by me later because, I have to renew the membership because that's Cheryl's gift. Right.
Right.
I was telling Lois that my old doctor, Dr. Megan, he told me that I had the lungs of a 70-year-old man. But he told it to be 35 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, but now if you have the lungs of a 70-year-old man, it's good.
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
Hopefully, they haven't changed much.
Right. Hopefully. Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
Good, excellent.
We're good. Oh, I have to find the mute button on here.
Liz is in the car. That's why she's. Yes.
Got it. Got it.
Rabbi, I always crazy things come to my mind. What happens if a Jewish slave accidentally kills someone? Do they go to a city of refuge and are they still a slave? And what happens?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's an excellent.
I wondered if it was discussed anywhere.
I'm sure it is.
Oh well.
All right. I'm not sure. Let me just see.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave. What?
No,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It was just a stupid sarcastic. Was this something that falls under the rubric of all practical halakha questions referred to real?
Yeah. Yes, it would.
It's very practical. It's very practical. Yeah. Okay.
All right, 1 second. Let me just see. Well, we can. Let us go back here. Let's just see. Let's just see. The term Hebrew servant used by this is the Rambam in his codes, the first chapter of the law of slaves. The term Hebrew servant used by the Torah refers to a Jew who the court sells by compulsion or a person who sells himself willingly. What is implied when a person steals and does not have the resources to repay the principal, the court sells him, as we've explained in Hilchot Kaneva, the laws of theft. No other Jewish person is sold by the court except a thief. Concerning such a thief, sold by the court, the Exodus, it says, when you acquire a Hebrew servant, and concerning this person, it states, when your Jewish brother will be sold to you. To what does the term a person who sells himself refer? When a Jew becomes sorely impoverished, the Torah gives him permission to sell himself as a servant. As it says in Leviticus, when your brother will become impoverished and be sold to you. A person is not allowed to sell himself as a servant and stash away the money and use it to buy merchandise or utensils or give it to his creditor. He may sell himself only when he needs the money for his very livelihood. A person's not permitted to sell himself unless he has no property remaining. Even his clothing no longer remains. Only in such a situation may he sell himself. We've already explained that a woman is never sold because of theft. Similarly, she may not sell herself as a servant, nor may she purchase a Hebrew servant or Canaanite slave because of the suspicion of immoral behavior. A convert may not sell himself as a servant. This is derived from Leviticus 25:41, and he shall return to his family. It is speaking about someone who has family within the Jewish faith. A Hebrew servant who is sold by the court is sold to a native-born Israelite or to a convert of Judaism. Similarly, a person who sells himself as a servant is not permitted to sell himself to a Gentile, not even to a resident alien. If he transgresses and sells himself even to a Gentile, even to the service of a false divinity itself, the sale is binding, as indicated by Leviticus 25:47. That's that Torah portion of Bahar, which speaks of a person selling himself to what must be uprooted from a sojourner's family, what must be uprooted first a false divinity. If a person says, I'm going to sell myself to a Gentile, you're not obligated to do anything for him until he actually sells himself. Once he sells himself to a Gentile, however, although he's transgressed and acted improperly, it's a mitzvah to redeem him, so he does not assimilate amongst them. As Leviticus 25:48 states, after his sold, redemption should be granted him. Neither a person who sells himself nor one who is sold by the court should be sold in public at an auction block, not in the alley, as slaves are sold. He should not be sold as slave sold. Instead, he should be sold in private and honorable manner. It is forbidden to make any Hebrew servant perform excruciating labor. What is excruciating labor? Labor has no limit. Labor that is unnecessary and is asked of the servant with the intent to give him work so that he will not remain idle. Based on the above, our sages said that a master should not tell a Hebrew servant, hoe under the vines until I come, for he's not placed a limit on the work. Okay, etc., etc. That's that. Whenever a Jew purchases a Hebrew servant, he may not make him perform debasing tasks that are relegated for other servants. It is, however, permitted to have the servant cut the master's hair, launder his clothes, bake his dough. He may not, however, make him the manager of a public bathhouse, a public barber, or a public baker. If, however, this was his profession before he was sold, it's permitted. Indeed, at the outset, he should not teach him any profession at all. Instead, he should work at the profession with which he worked previously. When does the above apply? To a Hebrew servant for his self-image is depressed because of being sold. Whenever a Jew has not been sold, he may be hired to perform several tasks, for he's performing this work of his own desire and his own consent. When people do not conduct themselves in an appropriate manner, it's permissible to impose one's authority over them by force and subjugate them. When a king decrees that anyone who did not pay the fixed head tax should be enslaved to the person who pays that tax for him, a person who pays that tax for someone may use that person for labor beyond the ordinary measure. He may not, however, use him as a Canaanite slave. If, however, that person does not conduct himself properly, he may use him as a slave. A master is obligated to treat a Hebrew servant or maidservant as his equal with regard to food, drink, clothing, and living quarters, as implied by Deuteronomy 15:16, for it is good for him with you. The master should not eat bread made from flour while the servant eats bread from coarse flour. The master should not drink aged wine while the servant drinks fresh wine. The master should not sleep on cushions while the servant sleeps on straw. Nor should the master live in a walled city while the servant lives in a village, or a master live in a village, etc., etc. On this basis, our sages said, whoever purchases a Hebrew servant purchases a master for himself. A master must treat a servant with brotherly love, as implied by, and with regard to your brothers, the children of Israel. Nevertheless, the servant himself must conduct himself as a servant with regard to those tasks he must perform. The institution of Hebrew maidservant and that of Hebrew servant is not practiced except in a time when the Jubilee year is observed. This applies to both Hebrew servant who sells himself and to one who is sold by the court. We've already explained when the observance in the Jubilee year was nullified. One who's sold by the court, and one who sells it can be acquired through the transfer of money or articles worth money and the transfer of deed of sale. The person selling himself writes a paper, a shard, I am sold to you, I've been acquired to you, and gives him the deed. A servant sold by the court must serve his master for 6 years from the day that he was sold. At the beginning of the 7th, he is released as a free man. If the sabbatical year falls within the 6 years of servitude, he must work during it. If, however, the Jubilee year falls during this time, even if he was sold only 1 year before the Jubilee, he should be granted his freedom. Okay, a person who sells himself into servitude may sell himself for more than 6 years. Nevertheless, if he sold himself for 10 years or 20 years, if the Jubilee falls a year after he sold himself, he's released. If either a servant who sold himself or was sold by the court flees his master's domain, he's obligated to complete his 6 years of servitude. If, however, the Jubilee falls during that time, he is granted freedom. This is where it would be. Should the servant become sick, whether he is sick year after year or whether he becomes sick repeatedly for short periods, if the time during which he is sick is less than 4 years, it should be counted in the period of 6 years. However, if he's sick for 4 years or more, he is required to complete the work for all the days of his illness beyond the 6 years for which he was originally sold. This is implied in Leviticus. When do we calculate the years of sin? When a person sells himself to a Gentile, if he is not redeemed, he's not released except in the Jubilee. When a person is sold to a Gentile, if he cannot obtain the funds necessary to redeem him, his relatives should redeem him. If his relatives don't, and he does not obtain the funds to redeem him, it's a mitzvah for every Jew to redeem him. A servant can borrow money. Whether a person sells himself to a Jew or Gentile, whether he's sold by the court, he may deduct money from the price. And whenever a Hebrew servant or maidservant is redeemed by deducting from the price. Okay, when a person is sold to a Gentile, it can receive itself partially. Although a master forgoes the remaining amount of money for which a servant is obligated to work, this obligation is not considered to be waived until the master writes a bill of release for the servant. The following rules apply when a servant's master dies. If the master is survived by his son, the servant must serve the son until the conclusion of the 6 years or the Jubilee. If, however, the master is not survived by a son, the servant is granted his freedom. He need not serve the surviving daughter of the deceased brother. Jubilee, paying money, bill of release. Hebrew masters obligated to provide sustenance for the wife of every Hebrew servant. He's not entitled to proceeds of the work. When a servant is sold by the court, she is permitted to the period of servitude. Marrying a Mennonite, Canaanite maidservant. Person who sells himself may prolong his servitude by having his ear pierced. If, however, a servant was sold by the court, he can do that. The Hebrew servant who is a priest may not have his ear pierced because it gives him a physical blemish. Ear piercing is a physical blemish that does not allow a Kohen to work in the Beis Hamikdash. How do you pierce the ear? Okay. I feel like if it had been here, it would have been in that earlier part.
Yeah.
About him being sick. And then you have to send them out with gifts so that they can make their own.
I wonder if the daughter of a deceased man doesn't inherit the slave because she isn't owed any money that's owed to her father.
But if there's only daughters, then they inherit like sons. It could be that earlier thing, they had a morality clause. Remember that thing that they didn't consider, they were concerned about the morality of a woman getting, they said before that a woman cannot, they don't sell a Hebrew slave to a woman because of a morality thing.
Huh.
And a woman can't sell herself.
And a woman can't sell herself. No. Okay.
Right. And so here, yes, I feel like it would have been here in these things if he would have talked about it. You'd think that he would have talked about it, to be honest with you. It's one of those.
Well, we tried.
Yeah. Okay. But there were a couple of things in there that I did not know, like having to support the wife makes sense if the man has nothing and he's selling himself into poverty, but I mean, into slavery, but it's also just fascinating. I mean, I expected it, but it's still fascinating to see how he goes. He's got all the laws. I mean, for that scenario. Okay.
It sounds like we think of it as someone being a servant, but it sounds like here's the poor guy who had to do this, and you should treat him very well because of it.
Right. But when it comes to the work, like what distinguishes a slave from a free person is he can't say no to work as long as it's considered acceptable work. Yeah. He can't say no to work. But also the Rambam did point out that you should try to give him work. If he had a certain skill, you should try to give him work with that skill.
Right.
Which doesn't sound very slave-like. Yeah, this sounds more like a kind of rehabilitation option.
Right. A way to, and also, doesn't a Jewish slave have to do all the man has to do all the positive mitzvahs too, which takes up a lot of time of his work.
Right. I guess the main benefit would be, like, let's say I had a farm and I need farm hands. Right. So I could see somebody agreeing to buy a Jewish slave because he just needs extra hands. He needs extra people to work for him. So that would be a kind of scenario where you'd see somebody maybe buying Hebrew slaves. Not so much to like he would have slave hands, those slave hand. I mean, no, I mean not slave hands. He'd have farm hands, like he would hire them. But this would be the question is, would it be cheaper than actually paying farm hands? Yeah, but it might be something, and it would also be rehabilitative, I guess, at the same time. Okay, we are getting to the very end of the the positive mitzvahs. We're getting to the very end of the list of positive commandments. And so we're at 245. That is that he commanded us about the law of buying and selling, meaning the ways in which the sale between the seller and the buyer is effectuated. They already brought as a proof about these ways his saying, when you surely sell to your kinsman or buy land from the hand, etc. And they already said something that is acquired from one hand to another, meaning to say by pulling it, and there is already explained from the Torah, money effectuates an acquisition, whereas pulling or movable objects is an ordinance of the sages, and likewise giving over and raising up. All right, so what is he talking about? So he's talking about forms of transaction. So you have an object and you want to sell it to another person. When does it belong to the other person? So there are different ways to affect that transition. One is, which we call a kinyan, an acquisition. So somebody could pay money, and upon receipt of the money, they would own it. Somebody could pick up the object, and upon picking up the object, he would own it. Somebody could draw the object towards them, like pull the object towards them, and that would be a way of affecting the transition. These are all manner of kinyan. So that's what he means by pulling and lifting up, etc. And an explanation, they said there, in the same way that they established pulling for purchase, they established pulling for guardians. Behold, it's already been made clear to you that they need pulling for sales, and therefore made an ordinance as explained in its place. Moreover, the rest of the ways with which one acquires land and other things, meaning a contract or a chazakah, by holding it, were surely only attached to the verses and not derived from them. The regulations of this law, meaning the way through which a sale is effectuated with each and every type, have already been established. So he's putting all in one mitzvah, the laws of acquiring. So that means selling, giving as a gift, and then also this is talking about movable objects. It's talking about land. So in Hebrew it's called mekach umemkar, buying and selling, and again, specifically what we're talking about is, when is it that it belongs to the other person? What happened? What do you have to do? What's the point at which it happens? And what are the means to make that kind of thing happening? So the drawing close to you, that's called meshicha. The lifting it up is called hagbaha. Those are very common ways in which it could happen. Also, the transfer of money. Interestingly, when they sell chametz to a Gentile before Pesach, they use all the various means just to make sure that the sale did in fact happen. They use all the different ways that you could do it. Also, you can do it by trading. Let's say you trade something. So let's say you have a goat and I have a goat, and we want to trade goats. So by taking possession, when one of them takes possession of the one goat, the other one owns the other goat. So there's all different ways of affecting this transition, but that's what we're looking for. We're looking for how to end the connection of an object or land to one person, and then sort of affect the transition to the other person. So that's what we mean usually when we say a kinyan, when something is acquired. There are some times when we are doing something and we call it a kinyan, but it's not exactly doing that, but rather you are doing something to signal an agreement or an arrangement. So there are times when somebody will lift up a pen or a handkerchief, like at a wedding, that is meant to signal agreement, a contractual agreement made between two people. That's called a kinyan sudar, like a kinyan made with a handkerchief. It's in that case, it's called a kinyan, even though there wasn't a transfer of ownership of anything at that point. Also, at a kiddushin, at a wedding ceremony, when money is put in the hands of the bride, or a ring is put on the finger of a bride, and she accepts it, that's also called a kinyan. There is like a signal of some kind of transition in relationship that happened. In this case, it's not about ownership, but it's about relationship. A relationship has been created in this case, but it's still done with witnesses of some kind of transfer of something. But that transfer is more like a symbol of a transition that happened. So you can have things that are called a kinyan. In most cases, a kinyan is actually the action that causes the transfer. So when he lifts it, he now owns it. When he draws it to him, he now owns it. So that kinyan actually caused the transfer. So there's times when a kinyan causes a transfer. There's times when a kinyan just signals an agreement. And there's times when kinyan could, again, signal a transition that has been made or is being made, but not ownership. It's not really ownership, but it is relationship. I guess you could say that when I own something, it means I have a particular relationship with it. What does it mean to own a baseball card collection? I have a particular relationship with it, which comes with all sorts of rules and privileges. So you could say that in that way, it works with what's happening at a marriage. Where it gets confusing is because there are people that interpret it that the husband is acquiring the wife as an object, because that's often the case when I'm acquiring an object. I use the word kinyan. Here, it doesn't mean that. He doesn't acquire as an object. He doesn't own her as an object. But there is a relationship to her, and you could say that in that way, it's similar because there's a kind of, a person has a relationship to an object as well. So in that way, the word kinyan you could say kinyan sort of means the same thing, the transition of relationship to an object or a person.
Rabbi,
yeah.
If two people are going to go into a partnership, they're changing their relation. Does that have to do with a document only, or can
Right. So that's okay. So let's see about that. Let's say, because in a certain sense, that's what's happening at the they call it the tanoim, the conditions before a marriage. This is something that we really only do nowadays because it's a way of giving honor to other people, but at the wedding. And also you had that moment where the two mothers break the plate. So those are moments people didn't want to give up. So we still do tanoim at our weddings, even though we're doing them right before the wedding happens. And the point of these tanoim is that the two fathers make a binding agreement that the wedding is going to happen on such and such day, that the wedding is going to happen. So there's a kind of partnership that is being signaled. There's a document, but there is like a kinyan at some point, signaling their agreement to what's in this document. So that would be something very close to what you're talking about. Certainly you must, if you don't write up a contract for a partnership, then it's foolishness. There needs to be a contract, but is there? I've never heard that you finish that with some kind of a kinyan. The question is, why not? Why are some things done with a kinyan and some things are not? I don't know the answer to that. Certainly partnership does seem to be a relationship with each other.
Yes.
Unless it's not a relationship between the two parties, but a relationship between each party and the object. Is partnership its own thing? Like, for instance, Bava Basra, which we're studying now in Daf Yomi, it begins with two partners that want to break it up. They own something together, and now one of them wants to sort of split it, divide it down the middle. Let's say it was a courtyard. One of them wants to divide it down the middle. And then it does go on to talk about two partners. If one of them wants to, let's say it's a company or something, he wants to divide the company or a business. So it talks about how that has to be done. I bet you there is discussion about whether or not partnership is in fact, when you own something together, is there some kind of relationship between you and the other person, or is it just an interest in an object that you share?
David suggests that with a marriage, it changes the halakhic status of the relationship, but maybe
it
not.
Does.
Yeah.
No, it does. Yeah. So, yeah, but what does that mean? So what that means is we have a relationship with each other, and that is like a consecrated relationship.
Right.
It's the relation. There is such a thing as a relationship, and it has all sorts of ramifications. But is there such a thing with business partners? So my gut is there is not. There is no relationship. It's just that we both share an interest in an object, but we don't have
That's
a relationship
what he's saying.
with each
It's
other.
not a halakhic.
It's not a halakhic changing the person himself.
Right. Yeah, I know. But when I prefer not use that, because it's not the only reason I'm preferring not to use that language is because it's hard to know what that means. But if I say there is, in other words, there's no relationship between the two of us. There's no, we have no relationship between each other. We only have a relationship with the object. There is no such thing as a partnership. The marriage, in a marriage, it's the same thing you're saying. It's just that in marriage, there's an actual relationship that has like consequences. It exists. The relationship itself exists. It's a thing. It's an entity, which is what you mean, I think, when you say the halachic consequences, legal consequences. But here, like the most dramatic legal consequence in a marriage is that she cannot enter into this relationship with somebody else. But there's all sorts of them. There is, in other words, there is a relationship. There is a relationship between a mother and a son. There's a relationship between brothers. So I think that's what you mean by halachic consequence. There's going to be law that is uniquely applicable just because they are brothers. There is, like Yibum, for instance, levirate marriage. There is law that is, there's what you were calling halachic consequence or legal consequence. If somebody's your father, you have to show them honor. You could be put to death for cursing them. Those are all ramifications of a relationship. But when it comes to business partners, there is no relationship. Also, let's say, you could say a similar thing between in-laws. That relationship, which in Yiddish is called a mechutanim, which is the relationship between in-laws with each other, the parents. So they don't have a relationship between them. They just share interest. They share a grandchild, let's say, or they share interest in the children. But there's no actual relationship. So that's what you mean when you call it halachic consequence. What you mean is, I would call it evidence of a relationship. But do we, the relationship might have meaning broadly, but the evidence of it is the halachic context. Like, for instance, let's say you have brothers, so they experience a connection. They experience a connection in all manner of ways, but the way we test to see what that connection is by seeing. No, yeah, that would be interesting. Is there such a thing as relationship that doesn't have a halachic context?
Rabbi, is there any difference between a maternal grandfather and a paternal grandfather as far as their obligation to educate? No,
because there's no difference between honoring your father and honoring your mother.
Okay.
For instance, there's no difference. The only reason, if they're actually married, you're supposed to show deference to the father, if they both ask for something at the same time. But if they're not married, then let's say they got divorced, then there's no difference. So you have from the grandchild's perspective, they have to honor their grandparents the same, whether they're maternal or
Okay.
paternal. But you're asking the other way around. You're asking as far as the responsibility of
A
grandparents.
grandfather, yeah, like a grandfather educating a grandson. There's no difference if it came from your mother's or your father's.
I would. I can't see why there would be, except if it was something that a woman doesn't have to do. That would be interesting. What if a woman doesn't have to do it, but a man does? What if you had something where a man has to do it, but a woman doesn't have to do it? So then would the paternal grandfather have to do it? These are good Gemara questions. You guys are doing well today. And that whole thing about the partners, relationship between partners, that sounds like one of these things that you'd find like in a Rav Shimon Shkop or a Baruch Bear, or like in those real yeshivish kind of achronim kind of commentaries on the Gemara. Is like, that would be something like somebody would say, here is a place where we find there's actually a relationship between partners, because there's a halachic consequence over here. Like, but that my gut feels like there shouldn't be, but maybe there is. I don't know. That's good. That's all. That's good stuff. Okay. I am grateful for learning today, and I look forward to learning together tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well,
And
guys.
tonight.
You're welcome. And tonight.
Yes, and tonight.
And tonight. Will you be there in person, Liz?
Yes, I will.
Okay, I look forward to
I
that.
will not be driving at that hour, except from my house to you.
Okay. All right. Be well.
Take care. See you later.
All right. Bye-bye.